Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We are starting with our round table dedicated to a very interesting subject. What a successful technological startup consists of. There can be many ingredients for a successful startup. An innovative idea, a team, smart investors, the first successful customers. There are quite a few ingredients of this sort. At the same time, we all know that the majority of startups are not successful. Me being an investor of many startups, well, I can say that not all of them were successful. At the same time, there is some certain experience and there are some certain ingredients that are of utmost importance for a successful startup. And we are going to talk about this very subject. So I want to introduce the participants. And we are going to talk here amongst people who are investing, who are creating companies. And I want to introduce Pekka Viljakainen. Currently, he is an advisor of Skolkovo president and he has quite significant experience in this industry. And at the same time, he's an investor of many companies. Then Mikhail Kokorich, one of the founders and the head of a very interesting technological startup. Well, no longer a startup. Oh, okay, still a startup. But I heard a lot about this startup. So it's a big working project that is about IT and space technologies. An interesting combination. To me, it looks quite new and quite interesting in terms of startup technologies. And we have Vladimir Trechikov, head of T8 company, which produces communication equipment. It's a very complex and fast-evolving market. And there we get first interesting Russian technologies. And I want to give floor to Pekka. And on the one hand side, we are going to listen to the speeches from the experts that are going to share their vision. And then we'll also have discussions and ask questions on the speeches. So.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, I have to speak in English. My Russian is still in a, I would say, Chukcha level. So I have to. But anyway, first of all, yes, of course, now I'm working in this, not only for Skolkovo, but by large for many Russian federal institutions as an advisor. And being in Russia as an advisor, it's interesting because in Western countries or in Finland, if you are an advisor, you first analyze, then you give an advice. In Russia, you first analyze, then you advise, and if the advice is good, then you have to do it also. So it's a very broad definition of being advisor in Russia. But actually, I want to start by saying that for me, the whole story of innovation is somehow, I would say, a little bit academic or semantic here in Russia sometimes. There are discussions, what is innovation? Well, what is startup? What is the purpose of innovation? For me, it's a very simple thing. The startup, innovation is relevant, startup is relevant if it can generate new jobs. And it can generate new jobs, which can then generate new innovations, which are globally competitive. I think today the theme here is pretty much what kind of startup is globally competitive. I'm not interested about the startup who invents something which is best in Russia, then some Russian state entity buys it and distributes across Russia. That is not for me the globally competitive. I'm more interested, I think the space story is very interesting in the sense that it's globally competitive area and so forth. So this is the basic what I want to say. We have this is my general slide in everywhere. But I think that what is the most important thing is that the last one, the third one. The question what it was said here, what is the successful startup? I think those startups are the best ones, which are from the very beginning close with their clients, which are from the very beginning getting benchmarking. I'm sure that in space industry, for example, the benchmarking is relatively easy because you see all the competitors and it's by nature a global market. The second word there in bullet number 3 is learning. I think no startupper, old or young, could say that he or she knows how to do business or how the space industry or any industry would be in 10 years. So I think for me the most important things are the genuine interest of making the product which is best in the planet, and to be hungry enough learning and being curious about the new things. And I'm already an old guy. I started my company when I was 13, 29 years ago. So, and then it grew to be 20,000 people business. But I'm now already retired and kind of an old guy. But still, I am interested to learn something new every day. And I have said that I'm ready to die when I'm not anymore curious. So I'm waiting for that morning. But seriously speaking, being curious is important. And somehow I want to conclude what I was saying, talking a little bit about the Russian reality. If I take 100 startups, I have met about 26,000 startuppers in 44 Russian cities in past 2 years. So it's not only Moscow show, it's not St. Petersburg. I've been in 44 cities. And I think in general, I am pretty pleased about the passion about the science, pretty pleased about the passion about how to solve technical problem. But I am not pleased at all about the interest who will use the technology then, meaning the consumers, meaning the end customers. And that is a clear weakness. The last what I want to say is I'm also an angel investor, like it was said. I don't look like an angel, but I'm an angel investor. And this is something people are asking, to which kind of companies I will put money in. And it's very simple answer. First of all, I will invest in such companies where teams and the entrepreneurs wants to make something good for the whole world. I mean, global market, who wants to learn. If I get a person, he or she, who tells that, Pekka, I know everything, I only need your money, I say that go away immediately, because it's impossible to understand somebody knows how to do everything. So this is, I know that there are people in the audience who are searching for funding for the company. It's always like, it's a very good thing to search for funding, but it's important to understand that I am personally investing only for the good teams, good people. And then if the satellites doesn't fly, it might be that you might make an electric car, or if that doesn't work, we do something else. So it's a spirit to be an entrepreneur for the first place, and secondly, the scientific part. I think this is my basic mantra. You might disagree. I hope that you disagree with me. This is a statement from the Russian Federation.
I understand. Большое спасибо, Pekka.
Thank you very much, Pekka, for such an interesting comment. I'd love to add something from my own experience. It's true when you say that the team is important, that people are crucial, are essential for work, because then you can do different things with this team. Very often we think that the idea can sell itself, that the idea has the key value, but unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, ideas are always there, but they have to be implemented at a high quality level, and then it's important to be able to sell those ideas. So bright people willing to do things are some definitive factors of success. And now I would like to ask Mikhail Kokorich to tell us about new area of development that he started. I think it would be very interesting to know. I need my presentation. So we work with space business. Many people think that this is the most innovative kind of businesses. However, I have to say that it's the most traditional and conservative kind of business. That's how the situation has been in the last 30 to 40 years. After our Korolev and Brown did. So the business has been very conservative, very mundane and down to earth. However, we can see that aerospace business attracts different entrepreneurs that find their own strategies, that set up startups, that raise money and then turn it into hardware. So private space. It always used to be an area of state influence. It has never been a private sector. So why has it changed now? What were the preconditions for this business to become attractive for private companies? First of all, it's much cheaper now to build a spaceship. It's very similar to the space revolution that happened in the 80s, when the first processor 08 was built by Intel company. So it means that you can make your own computer using some TV and other hardware. And the same is true about space, because electronics and microelectronics help you create different instruments. For example, chromium, which is stable for different rays. So, for example, this is the first ship that was assembled in Russia. And it cost only some $100,000, which is nothing really. Do you remember Aristotle Onassis or Kennedy? Because he invented container for transportation, and that transportation container changed the method of transporting goods. And Bob Twiggs from Stanford University created USAT standard, 10 by 10 centimeters. Well, university satellites, who would need them? But it was the instruments based on those boxes like Lego construction dominate the sphere. And the number of such machines is growing exponentially, because now we have 100 and next year it'll be 200 or 300, and this is the launch of those machines. And of course it leads to the market explosion. A few years ago, spaceships could be understood only by professionals. We didn't have Google Earth or Yandex Maps, but this market is growing at the moment. And let's look at these figures. 4 years ago, the market was just $1 billion, but in 7 years, it will be $7 billion. And this is just part of big matryoshka, this enclosed traditional Russian doll. So they have coordinates, they have maps. So geosystems would make $10 billion, and then it will be hundreds of billion of dollars if we think globally, and then trillions of dollars. So For example, those companies that use geo information services without IPO would make lots and lots of billions. So first of all, we develop geo services for businesses, and all these services have to be quite simple and straightforward. So you can just take take a phone, record a field, tie in the images, see the state of the fields, whether they were damaged by some atmospheric conditions like hail and other things. And it's very easy to do. So this is the real link between the physical world and virtual field, and the spaceships provide these links, these connections. Now, services for consumers. Our space maps is used by many people, and our platform is used by millions of people. There are lots of requests that people make using our platform. Now, geodata. For example, we do space imagery or orbital survey. Of course, you need CCTV system so that the computer system could receive all the data and then distribute it. Now, satellite operation. The the headquarters is just one computer and two monitors. Here you can see the prototype of our system that can help you order these satellite observations using the computer. And so here you can see some hardware that we produce. So those sectors that seemed a few years ago very far from innovations and technological entrepreneurship, they suddenly become the areas for that. Of course, if there's no global market, it's very difficult to set up a startup, for example, that produces solar panels. So we need special conditions. So something should be changed in this industry, and every industry achieves a certain stage, and we witness now great changes in aerospace industry. And we know that the costs are going to be reduced, that people might go to Mars and find some place for them to live. And this is no longer fairy tales. This is the reality that has been calculated, and probably our generation will see it. Thank you.
Say that Mikhail was just demonstrating what is entrepreneurship. Whatever is the question, he will always introduce his offering. This is the typical successful entrepreneur. Whatever you ask, you tell what you are doing, how you are making money. This is a good start for the session. Just a comment.
Thank you, Pekka. Thank you. На самом деле я хочу сказать.
I have to say that Skolkovo helps us a lot, and this is a great example of development institution. However, once we failed to get a grant, but it was our fault. But then we contacted them for the second time, and then we received the biggest grant in our space cluster. So we try to use all kinds of benefits. It's not easy sometimes, for example, customs benefits. But still, it's one of the little bricks that makes our work beneficial here in Russia. And Skolkovo is one of those arguments why technological business finds its place here in Russia, why it's interesting for us to work in Russia. There's no market. There's only 3% of global market, because there's no Russian market for this orbital survey. space imagery. But we have seen the software sector growing. For example, 5 billion. But of course, Russian GDP is very low. But still, there are some processes underway. Well, it's a unique industry for Russia. For example, speaking about IT, lots of people emigrate from Russia to the West. Many people went to the Silicon Valley. In space, it's much more difficult. The engineering culture is different. The mobility pattern is different. So it's very interesting to see these different flows. But do you think that also space industry is has always been the prerogative of the government, and there's very little space for private innovations? Well, whenever the industry is regulated by the government, there's very little space for innovations. For example, we can compare like communal housing or innovations. Of course, software has bigger space for innovations. Yes, it's only now that this sector is getting some regulations, undergoing certain regulations. And we were talking to the minister today, and they say that the investors' activity would become less as a result of this government regulation. And now, Vladimir, I would like to give the floor to you. Hello, my name is Vladimir Trechikov. I'm the director of T8 company. It's very difficult to speak after such a brilliant space talk, but I'll try. So these are the things that we do, different systems, hardware for instantaneous transmission. Well, the traffic is growing exponentially. For example, over the 11 years, it's been grown by 1,000 times. And of course, if we speak about different technologies, it's not easy to do. And for example, we try to use fiber for transmission. It's basically more, it's like 90% which is used nowadays, much more widely used than wire. And so we are also take part in this race, and we managed to achieve good results. We have 150 people of developers on the team, and for example, in the past, like 5 people could work with fiber optics, but now with different kind of speed and momentum, the teams have to be bigger. So that's what we do. We develop DWDM systems, design, provide services and installation, and we have 1 decade event, a coherent transmission, and this is like a classical electronic principle is applicable to optics now. When you, for example, tune the radio transmitter to the station, you can sort of light, to emphasize it with light. And the same you do it with a laser, because just the lasers were not good enough. We didn't have enough components and parts. And in Russia, we have been the only company that managed to develop an adequate system. So that's what it looks like. And the most interesting are the this kind of systems. And we managed to win the grant from Skolkovo in IT cluster, and we're very grateful to Skolkovo because they gave us a grant and it helped us continue development, and it helped us improve our systems by 40%, and it's now working very well. And well, the speed of the systems were much less before, and so this was a great leap for us in terms of quality. Here you can see some figures related to the market. And we have to say that these technologies continue growing. For example, that red curve is going through the others. And these heterogeneous links are very effective, like 8 terabytes for 4,000 kilometers. And so it's information intensive, which is also good. And we actually managed to make 2 world records. Even though one was beaten by Cisco, but as to the second one, it's the best results, and they're better than those that the largest companies have on the market. These are our innovations, and you can see it right here on the first floor, on the ground floor in this building. And why we received this grant from Skolkovo? Because we can transmit 27 terabytes of information. That's a great mass of information. And we had to make a few trial projects, but finally it worked. Then we have lots of students' programs. We can see lots of young people here, and we're looking for engineers, for graduates, who come as interns to our company, and then they defend their thesis, and so we become a great instrument for learning and education. So, and why do we have so few technological startups? Many people like it. Many people say, oh, it's great, but still there are not so many participants. It's just that operators would always choose imported equipment rather than the local ones. And that's why we don't have many Russian companies. We only hold 7% of the market. For example, in China, the government force people, make companies use their own locally made equipment, whereas we don't have such regulations here in Russia. Maybe there also we have this anti or negative advertising, because Zhiguli, this Russian local car, will never be as good as Toyota. And then another thing is related to funding. Again, state support, for example, in China, that helped increase Chinese company Huawei.
So if we calculate as 1 million of production for in terms of Russian market, the Chinese were considerably better. So it's good. And there are some other reasons that quite logically lead to all the goods being produced there. So just a funny slide I've introduced. It's kind of a rule. If you're a Russian company, your supply should be twice as quick, and it's quite heavily supported by Western vendors. Some many examples of what it is like in the West, and some funny things that, for instance, that it's cheaper to produce it produce it abroad. It's cheaper because of the taxes rather than components. So even technological startups face these various problems. So what does it lead to? Many people are talking about development engineering, and so on, but you need to do that when there is demand for it. And now when we have this structure of demand, well, I'd say we don't need an Academy of Science under these conditions, because it's about different kinds of support. Why does it make sense to fund the Academy of Science if you get 80% from other market? I'm all for technological collaboration. I visit the Silicon Valley quite often, and when a company can move there, and it's great. But what I want to say that my opinion is as follows. people are not working more there. People are not more talented there. It's not about this. It's about infrastructure. Just a simple example. Like if you need, if I need advice in the U.S., I'll call. I'll make a call and I get it in the evening. It'll cost $100. And when you call here, you'll get to get a device. You'll get it in half a year, and it'll cost $500,000 for you. Of course, it's an exaggeration, but yeah. But the startups in Skolkovo are growing. This area is becoming more active, and this import replacement, of course, it's about the possibilities we are getting. And I guess those who enter this sphere now, I'm not talking fiber, I'm talking startups. Of course, these people get 10 times more opportunities than 10 years ago. And I'm quite optimistic, and I can see that during the last 1 or 2 years, there are changes, and they're to the best. And basically, this is it. And if you have any questions, I'll be very glad to answer. Yes, I do have a question. I think it's a rather good example. Those startups that are based on on a scientific team and based on experience from the Soviet times, like PhDs, for instance. Yeah, and these projects need a bigger market. So do you have any plans to move on to a global market? Well, of course we do have these plans, and you know, telecom equipment promotion. It is a systematic task. You cannot do it little by little. You know how Chinese people promoted their equipment. Chinese people came here and they were presenting their equipment, which costs tens of millions of dollars. But we do plan to move on to the foreign market. And Nikiforov, the Minister for Communications, was mentioning that we have a simpler, easier access to BRICS countries and so on. But, you know, when we are talking about trunk telecom equipment, you cannot sell it piece by piece. It's about selling systems. We are planning that, but we'll do it step by step, because the ticket is quite expensive, so to say.
Few times here, and I just want to clarify one thing. Perhaps it's the English translation on the wording, but just that Skolkovo, for the audience, Skolkovo is not like a competition that then you win an award, so to say, or financing. Our criteria are actually, of course, the scientific part, but also how it is commercialized and what is the interest for the commercial market. So, and this is important. Skolkovo is open for any companies, not only Russian companies, but any who wants to do R&D, and that is extremely important. But I think coming back to this telecom device issue, I think it's very clear that when there is competitive products on the market, Russian government, but even more the companies will select those eventually. But like it's the old wisdom that nobody is the advisor in the home country, so to say. You have to show in some other markets that somebody else is selecting it first, and then it's becoming interesting also for Russian, which is a kind of a, I know that it's a dilemma, and especially in telecom area where the buying cycles are long.
Можно мне тоже прокомментировать? Вообще.
Allow me to comment this as well. Yes, this export thing, sometimes it's quite weird. When we managed to sell quite a big project in Kazakhstan, it started developing in Russia, because we've been told that, okay, if you are managing to export, maybe you can work for us as well. On the other hand side, the Kazakh people were saying that it's good that you're selling abroad, because we've managed to destroy everything in our country, and you're in Russia doing really great. So, yeah, it always seems that it's better somewhere else. And when I'm visiting Silicon Valley, the level, they're not doing worse, they're not doing better. And all this sort of worshipping and propaganda, yeah, it's funny. Well, the global trade system is aimed at high-tech product selling, and in most of the countries they have expert agencies that fund and so on. And we have this agency in Russia, and it helped us. Well, at least we got the contract, and we'll be working on it in the nearest time, like 2 projects from India. No one's buying aircrafts, satellites, and other expensive high-tech things without partial funding from the government. Like in France, it's CAFAS. In the US, it's Eximbank. Now it's XR with us. So an interesting thing about the US, that now they're talking about stopping the support for why taxpayers should fund them, should give money to them. But now we are the country who's exporting mostly raw materials. The issue of Russian export support is of great importance, and I'll agree with Vladimir saying that the custom things are so confusing and complicated, and in bringing some components, some spare parts, it's a nightmare. It's so you really have to do a lot of unnecessary things, but we are getting more advantages as of now. And as for XR, I think you need to talk to XR. It's a very good tool for supporting export. Could you give us a couple of words about this agency? As far as I understand, this is a new agency that provides some warranties. Yeah, as any agency, it guarantees the commercial risk, the risk of failing to get your payment, or they guarantee the commercial risk of a purchaser. So if you're using XR guarantee, it's like Russian guarantee, you can get the funding in the amount of 70 to 80% of the amount of the export value, and it's quite an important criterion. So yeah, Chinese companies like Huawei, they are managing to enter in our market quite successfully due to support from such agencies. So yeah, we got this model now because we never had that. Yes, we got it now. We have it now, and it's quite successful. So you have a successful experience. Well, we haven't yet got this guarantee or this warrant. It takes around half a year. It's not easy, but there are deals that we have deals for Sukhoi Superjet. There are some satellite projects, and there are some Moscow region companies that move on this direction. So yeah, there's a number of projects who are being implemented via this agency. Yeah, it's quite important for technological startups as well. It's very important to get the support for promotion and so on. And yeah, we were lacking this these elements, and getting Skolkovo, getting RBC and other agencies. I think the landscape has changed over the recent years, and now we are seeing a different picture. Now it's more like lacking project rather than getting rather problems with funding.
We have now about 1,000 projects at Skolkovo, but we need more. We have went through about 7,000 projects, out of which we have selected those 1,000. Of course, like in any startup ecosystem, some will die, some will live, so we have cleaned the base, so to say. So I think we have a pretty healthy that, but we are really searching for new projects. This is extremely important thing. But I want to say about the Skolkovo one thing, that our aim is not to build Skolkovo close to Moscow. Our aim is to copy all the best practices to all the Russian regions. I'm not saying that such a law will appear tomorrow, but that is the whole aim of the Skolkovo. Skolkovo is not designed that every talent should move to Moscow and enjoy the traffic jams here. We should have their own Skolkovos everywhere. So that's but one thing about the successful startups, I think this space is a great example of it. That one weakness what I see in the startup companies and entrepreneurship in Russia is that Russians are utilizing very little about the foreigners which are actually inside the country already. I mean that when we went last year in startup tour, hundreds of companies through, and I was watching many of the presentations, I was never seeing a non-Russian name there. In a company presentation. Can you imagine that you are watching like 100, 200, 300 companies, not a single non-Russian name? And I'm not saying that foreigners are wiser. I'm only saying that if you are going global, it is unlikely that if you are in the city of Tomsk and you have 20 guys from Tomsk University, that they would know everything about what is the market in Brazil. It might be good to have one Brazilian who happens to be in the Tomsk University part of the team, and this seems to be very difficult. I mean, this trust issue, you take your best friends, it's easy to communicate with your own language, have all that kind of thing, and I think that is also one signal for me for a good entrepreneurship. If you are brave enough to take other talents to your team from other countries, just to make it more competitive. And one common denominator for successful startups here is that people have been very open to deal with other people. I tell you, last thing, the #1 game company in the world is Supercell from Finland. It's valued now $4 billion. They have 265 people in Helsinki. But those 260 people are from 45 countries. So they have taken students from all the universities, they have taken to the team, and by doing that they can develop in Helsinki something which is valid for whole world. And I think this is something what I want to raise as a goal also for entrepreneurs, to build really international teams.
Очень, мне кажется, интересная.
I believe it's a very interesting view on an interesting facet of entrepreneurship in Russia. And I agree with Pekka about us having a worse understanding of or little knowledge here. But we have to make use of additional knowledge. And to my mind, in order to make our community more open, you need to consider our projects and technologies we are working on as global projects and technologies. And as one of the indicators of potential startup success is it being oriented on a global market. And we are excluding quite a big piece of competition if we don't do that. So I want to involve our experts into the discussion. Here we have experts who have great knowledge about investment and projects. So, colleagues, any questions, anything to add? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Sergei Surov. I represent here Business Accelerator from Moscow Physical and Technical Institute. It's our joint project with the Moscow Higher School of Economics. What we do, we help the startups from physical and technical department and other teams who join them. We help them promoting their project. We are called technological startups, way to success. Here we have a better translation in the screen. Ingredients for success. It's a better way of putting it, and I'll explain why. For a startup to be successful, you need an idea, you need a team, and you need investment. And all these three ingredients, of course, they can be joined by other things, but they're quite clear. Idea and a team is something that's the basis, and startup without it cannot exist. And how do we get investment? Well, that's something that we need to train our startup teams in. Before that, we had a session. I was also an expert in the previous session. It was called Optimum Strategies and Models for Venture Investors. Why am I mentioning that? Because you need to understand that those people who provide money for startups, they are not your, they do not share your ideas, maybe. For them, in most cases, the main idea is to get their money back. And working with startup teams, we present the projects from our teams. We bring them to various foundations, like development funds, and there is a certain chain of investors. There is a certain investment team, I think, to put it like that. So the first stage is various development institutions, some Bortnik's fund, RBC fund, Skolkovo foundations with this residency program. Then we get our guys to meet the business angels. Then they move on to venture funds, and in physical and technological university we also have our own funds. And there is this magical word IPO, and everyone's heard of it, but I'll carefully put it like that. Very few people came across it. Why am I talking mostly about investment? Because I believe it to be quite important to realize. It's very important that startuppers realize that it's a significant part of a success, and it's something they lack. And we heard it many times that there are less projects than investment. Well, I'd say that it's probably not exactly true. There are different projects, but the projects are different. And very often, if you trust into a project, then it works. And if you don't show your trust, then no. Well, there are a lot of startups, but to really promote them, to really bring them to real investors, you need professional assistance. They need professional assistance. And I believe that business accelerators do help that, both within the universities and within other institutions and venture structures. Oh, it's really important to get startups there.
I agree completely with Sergei's comment. It's true that entrepreneurship is not the strength in this country. It's not the national strength of Russia. So there's a lot of things to learn. Our fathers and grandfathers did not really teach how to be entrepreneurs. We didn't get this education at universities. And I remember that back in the 90s, I had basically to just get experience, not to understand what this entrepreneurship is all about. I had a partner, I had a great friend of mine, an engineer that I met in the Soviet time. He was from America. So he was an American man. And at a very early stage, he he suggested having a startup project in America. It was back in 1993, and then I remember that when in 1996 our technologies became the best in the industry, he told me, we have to sell it. It's time to sell it. And I said, I was so surprised. How come, Bill, we have to sell it? We have just become the best. Look, they want to buy our products in America, in Europe, great projects in Russia. It's the right time to sell. And this was a fantastic lesson for me, because he had to explain me why we had to sell it over the year, why it was important. And I couldn't really agree to that. It was so difficult for me to sell something that was my thing, and it was a really international project. So he explained, Tagir, you have to see it. We created the best technology. Now we have to sell it as best as we can. We'll need a lot of money, and it's either that we'll have to invest, which is not easy, or we have to just become the leaders on the market. Then our technology will survive. Then we'll be able to make money, and our technology will continue developing. So, as a result, we had a bid between market leaders in terms of sales volumes, and we successfully sold the technologies. That was a leading at that time. It was a leading technology at that time, and it was such a big emotional impact on me, because this was a real lesson for me, because I sort of got attached to this project. So I was building this business as a project. So this emotional impact was one of the factors that I had to come to terms with, to accept it. And now I always see the projects as investment projects. But anyway, it was a very important step for me when I had a coach and a partner who explained it all carefully, because he was very patient about this. Since I remember that we had a very long discussions. And he had to explain how the industry worked, because I was full of illusions. I thought, oh, this is the Russian market that is going to explode. This is the international market that we came to. So this didn't let me analyze and understand all the little details. So, of course, it's clear that we have to teach young people. We have to show them different things in a different light than they see it. And yes, Pekka, you wanted to share something.
Comparison. I was born in 1972, and my grandfather was one of the founders of a company called Nokia. So when I was 5 years old, 1977, he started to talk to me about how to run a business. So much that my grandmother said that it's boring. So I mean 5 years old, starting that, Pekka, how do you lead your team? I'm 5 years old. I want to play with Legos. No, you lead your team. So why I'm telling this is that the entrepreneurship and this trust, because entrepreneurship is trust on your own capabilities, but other people, it is something what you can learn. But the most effective way is to have different type of people in your team. I mean, every clever leader in this world, if he or she doesn't know something, he will buy it. I think it's the greatest wisdom of Steve Jobs or Steve Ballmer or something. If they need something, some competence, they take to the team. And that really needs strong, people, because you always want to hire people who are weaker than you are so you can control them. But entrepreneurship and startup culture is that you always hire smarter people who will add value to the team. And that's why, even because people easily after this kind of session think that, okay, we don't have an entrepreneurship culture, okay, I don't do anything. But I'm saying that you can buy such elements, you can get such competencies to your team, and that's what you should do. I think you have done it a lot to have a different kind of team members.
Еще комментарий от эксперта.
Здравствуйте. Yaroslav, Gorodetskiy, компания CDNvideo.
Hello, I'm Alexander Gorodetskiy. Our first startup took place 4 years ago, and we have been quite successful in development. I just wanted to add that I completely agree with Pekka that people is the main thing in business. So those people that you hire, it can be compared to your family. Like you get married to those people, and you create a family with them. And only investing in people is worth it and gives its fruit. And you don't have to hire some stars. You can just identify stars to be, like future stars. It's quite magical. There is no universal recipe for that. But still, I have to say that we've been very successful when we hired some people that didn't have any education, didn't have right education for us, but it was a right thing to do. And I would identify priorities this way. First of all, people, your team you're going to work with, and then the clients or customers. Of course, technologies are important. Everybody likes working with different technologies. We have lots of inventions, good imagination in Russia, but it comes second because you produce products for your customers, and you have to listen to your customers. Otherwise, you won't be successful. Sometimes you can just get absorbed in your own world, which is far from reality, and just do something for yourself, whereas we try always to go down to earth, to talk to real customers. I often travel, I often go to my customers, even if they're not very big, just to do this reality check, how realistic we are. So you have to listen to your customers, and then you'll be happy. And then the third thing, is your shareholders and funding. Maybe it's turned upside down because in our startup sector, because sometimes people just want to get money and then think what you want to do with that money. And I think that you can borrow money, or you can take money only if there's no other way to do it. Like if you don't have money to pay salaries to your staff, then you can take some money. Otherwise, you should try to get by without it. Like when we had to expand our business before the Olympic Games in Sochi, we raised some funding. We went to this foundation, Leader Foundation. But it's only when you just can't get by without money. But you shouldn't really tempt yourself with money, because once you get a lot of money, you'll want to spend it. You want to raise your salary. You want to get some star specialists from the market, spend it some other way. But I have to say that you should try to be as economical as possible, and you should spend money only when really needed. Thank you very much. Mikhail. Yeah, it's a very important thing related to leadership, and what Pekka said. It's obvious, especially when you used to work with big companies like 1,000 or 10,000 people, whereas when you started all from scratch with just 1, 2, 5, 10 people, or then finally 100. So what kind of people should you work with? How can you select the right kind of people? What kind of personal profile for a startup would be the best? As a man, sometimes my intuition doesn't work well. So I have my own model as to how to evaluate the people that I'm gonna hire. When, especially if we speak about a company without any clear role distribution, without any clear understanding of goals, without clear pattern of control. So there are a few things that are crucial for me. First of all, honesty. And why I say that honesty is essential, because it makes everything easy. If you're not honest with your team members, when you think one thing and say another thing, you'll result in big losses. Then this is not enough. The second thing is your goal-orientedness. What is an honest man? An honest man is a person who thinks and does the same. And the person who is holistic, so to say, who is oriented or focused on the goal, you not only think, do, but also make sure you achieve certain goals. And this is a driving force for a person. Then the next one is maturity. And maturity is not about age. Sometimes at the age of 5, you can be much more mature than a 60-year-old. Like I see my daughter, and I can see that she is much more mature sometimes than myself. For example, she asks me, you didn't think what you did right and what you did wrong today. So you have to reflect on what you do. You have to see what you do as someone outside, as an outsider. And of course, it's not only about creating some positive attitude, some optimism, because this is, of course, it's a great driver for the team. It's something that you have to share with each other. And but the smaller your team is, the smaller room there is for pessimists. And of course, enthusiasm is important. Sometimes I invest in teams and I don't believe in those people that have a different hobby than their business, because if you start up new business, you'll spend all your energy on that, into that. If you have some other hobby that takes a lot of time, like yachting or gym exercising, then you should just go and do it. Because entrepreneur, when he sets up his company, it's his child. It's something that the focus of his attention. And it's easy to identify, just not by intuition, but just logically, understanding, just talking to him and just observing how he works.
Well, I must tell you that when you get older, you understand that gym is important. But that's another story. But I think I have one comment, actually not for you, but for the previous expert. 8 years ago, in front of 3,000 people, I said to the microphone that I strongly disagree with the president of Russian Federation in St. Petersburg Forum, and I ended up to be his advisor. But I will use the same sentence with the expert here. Actually, you said a lot of good things. Most of us, 99% was I agree. But I disagree with this money issue. I do understand that you have to be careful where do you spend money. But I have invested in 9 startups in Russia, 9. And practically every day, when I talk with them, I have a video screens, whether they are in Tomsk or in St. Petersburg. I have a telepresence, I talk with them. I try to push them think bigger. And if I ask from Roman from Tomsk, why didn't you do this test marketing in Canada? He said that because I have only this $11,000 in account and I will use $2,000. I said, why didn't you ask money? No, because my mother said, Babushka said that don't take any additional funding. And I do understand it. It's good to be careful with money, but this is also a weakness for Russian startups, honestly, because if you have a, let's say Mikhail you have a high-speed routers, and because of that you don't want to give any share of your company to anybody, and because of that you will not test it how it works in US or how it works in Finland or how it works in China, you will lose most likely an opportunity. Of course it's a balance, it's a balancing issue, but the big thinking is that there are a lot of stories in Russia about minority shareholders and shareholders fighting and people are getting killed of shareholders trying to do this and that. What I have understood, most of those stories are from in the 90s. And there are some perhaps from 10 years back, but still you have to have such shareholders you trust. They are your family members. And you have to think big because you want to conquer the world, not to be best and most beautiful boy in Moscow or now the best company in Russia. And that's, I disagree with you on this money issue.
На самом деле,
It's a very important remark, because I can see that startups can lose a chance sometimes when they become too focused on technologies and they don't have enough money for promoting their products, for thinking globally. They think that the priority is about technological development, so they lose the momentum, whereas they have to move on to the next stage in the right time and to attract funding at the right time. So this is one of the key elements of success, because we have to think about different stages in funding. And of course, it's related to not only to technologies, but to promoting and increasing sales. And of course, the second stage, when you move on to the global market, it's a special stage. And this is something that we have to learn, we have to reach yet. Like speaking about technologies, we have good teams, we have great ideas and projects, but not so many teams that approach the global level. And you know these companies, EBI, Perils, Kaspersky Lab, but they're very few, maybe just a dozen. 2 dozen, and I just work in this industry. I know them. Maybe there are also some guys that are very well known on the international market, but are not so well known in Russia. So, of course, the right moment in time is important, but also the right strategy of sales and promotion. We were speaking about qualities that were important. I also put down some of the qualities. I don't want to list all of them, but I think that the person should be a professional and is willing to develop in this area, because I sometimes give consultations to people that I know. For example, you have analyzed your competitors, so they're better than you. Are you ready to work much harder in order to become better? I'm very, sometimes you get very emotional. You think, yeah, I'll do it. But speaking about professionals, speaking about real skills that you have, these can be a real problem. And the second thing is just what Mikhail said, honesty. And but I'd love to rephrase it. Because, for example, I have this article above my table. The importance of stupidity in scientific work. I took it in Harvard. I removed it from the wall in Harvard. So if you go into science, if you go in technological area sector, of course there'll be many failures. If you work smooth, if there are no failures, then you're out of the science. And there is some proof for that. It's not that fun, actually.
Of course, there will be a lot of famous stories, and of course people are not going to demonstrate that. They're going to hide it, and that's what will cause problems. That's the worst part of it. And how to deal with that, well, I don't know. At least you need to understand that there will be failures and you need to admit them. And if there are no failures, it's also not science. Dear colleagues, maybe you have any questions, any comments? Please introduce yourself. My name is Victor. I have a working business and a startup. And Mikhail and Vladimir, from what I understand, they are working more with public sector. Mostly, their customer mostly are from the public sector. We are, my business is not working with them, but we are planning to do that in time. So, I believe that many startuppers, they are making a project deliberately for public sector. Don't you think it's a bad thing? Because when you do projects only for public sector deliberately, even so, let me say something about that. Firstly, my company is not 100% about public startups, and yeah, it's a tricky question. And my sincere advice is, if you have a chance to sell something not to a public sector, it's much easier. It's not totally my opinion. Many people share it. Business to customer is sort of possible, but business to business or business to public sector, it's considerably trickier, especially because of corruption. And very often for public sector, it's easier to get something from foreigners rather than from you. But if your market is less competitive, then yeah. I guess Mikhail can also provide his comments. Well, maybe you weren't that attentive when listening. So once again, I can say that in our market, the share of Russia is so insignificant that there isn't a single selling point there. I believe that. I mean, this market is a public market here. Like shooting, processing market, we don't have competitors. There is no point to compete with Rothenbergs, for instance. And 95% of our jobs are foreign jobs. Like the only request from Roscosmos we got was happened a long time ago, and because you produce tons of papers and it's not a profitable project when you do it for public sector, at least in our industry.
Both gentlemen, they're offering, and if they would tell at the end of their story to me as an investor that, and Pekka, we are in public sector, I would never invest to them. The companies which are designed only for public sector procurement, there is something wrong. This is my personal assumption on this issue. That's why. Of course, there are public sector clients. Of course, governments will buy telecom infrastructure, but it's almost like an insult for their science, so to say, because if megaphone or if telecom backbones are built with the TA technology or satellite pictures, I think in 2020 more normal ordinary people will buy those satellite images than governments, so to say. So in that sense, I think it's a very unhealthy way of thinking that I am tailoring this design for the public sector. Okay, you might be in the weapons or arm or something like this kind of military stuff, that might be different, but in general, the public sector procurement is everywhere in the world, very complicated. And that's why I think you should tailor that you are always in the private market, and then you might sell something on top of it for the public clients.
Я хочу обобщить вывод. Ориентация на госсектор не является
Yeah, I want to summarize that. working with public sector is not an ingredient for successful startup. You need to start with an open market, and then if you manage to, you work with bigger customers. So any other questions or comments? Thank you. My name is Andrei Oskop. I represent Inavia GmbH company, or Din Aero in Kazan, the Russian part of a company. We are developing multi-mode screen crafts. It's higher than screen planes. We have a number of patents in the US, in EU, particularly in Germany, in Russia, and we are getting more patents. We got A rating in Russian startup rating system. Nevertheless, we managed to become. We didn't manage to become innovators. Speaking about the expert council, it feels that they do not have sufficient competences to really realize what this project is about. I know that there is this wave of biotechnology and other and more interest lies within these areas, and aviation is kind of avoided. So the question is how to attract investors' attention if we are not focusing on public sector, so on. We are a global market player, and how do you attract investors in this case, and how to demonstrate that this project is worth it, and it's even industry-forming project?
If I take Skolkovo as an example, Skolkovo is very clearly stated that we invest money for scientific projects, so to say, which is a commercialization of the scientific part. But I think your question is extremely good, because when we talk about startups, and I as an investor, I will never invest on science. I am investing on money making. So there are investors who are investing wants to support next Nobel Prize winner or something very early stage science, but most of the investors which I know, they are only interested about the return of investment, how to get their money back. So in other words, if your project or your company is not accepted by Skolkovo or some saying as an innovative company, it doesn't mean that it's a bad company. It doesn't mean that it's a bad company and it's non-interesting for investors. Actually, it's totally the opposite. If you are a very scientific one and you don't have anything commercial there, it's for investors, it's a little bit problematic thing. This is also a little bit the Russian language cultural issue, because when you say innovation, people are asking, do you have a patent? And then you say that you are a startup, you also ask, do you have a patent? Who cares about the patent if you have a money-making engine? So in that sense, I think that you have a very good chance to find an investor if you have a good business story and the money making. But this is also an educational test. Sorry for my long answer, but there was, I think in city of Astrakhan, we had a startup tour 2 years ago, and there was great projects, absolutely great. Then there was a lady coming afterwards in the corridor, stopping me that, can I talk with you, because I have a project which is not innovative enough. I am doing chemical, how to clean environmental cleaning device. I mean cleaning, for the cleaning ladies. And I said, okay. She was looking very nice, but then secondly, she also said to me that she's only hired 8 people and she's making 8% profit of selling those chemical things. And the business is growing 50%. She was not innovative enough to be in the listing, but absolutely perfect business and really an entrepreneur. So I think your question is that we should not neglect that part, even we are in open innovations. We are here to make money, not making some kind of awards.
Did you invest?
Actually, we did. We did. Actually, the thing is that the company was bought then by the bigger Russian company, So I was a little bit too slow on that area, but I mean, it tells a story that there are a lot of people who think that their company is not innovative enough, and many times Russian professors in universities, sorry all the professors, tell to their students that great idea but not innovative enough.
Ну и действительно у инвесторов существует мода, это тоже.
Yeah, it is really true, and you also need to admit it that investors also have their trends, some dominating trends. Like now it's cloud computing, social networking, like IT trends, biotech, material science, and some power efficiency trend in place for many years. And there are very few, investments into aviation, like from venture funds. And it was also true for space industry. And if you have a look at Skybox, one of the first successful companies that was sold by Google for $500 million, and they managed to earn $90 million in total. And there wasn't a single word about satellites in their website. They were telling investors what investors wanted to hear because they wanted to get into their business models. Because investors, especially venture investors, they get hundreds and thousands of projects, and to sort them, they use a quite basic template, so to say. So maybe like there is a lot of talking about drones. Maybe you focus on drones or unmanned vehicles. So innovation, there aren't many examples when venture funds are given money. There are very few disruption ideas in the latest years. Maybe one of the very few examples is small personal jet, but even I think it was Eclipse and Cityverse. They were working in the US, but they went bankrupt. In some, but there are some organizations supporting such projects. Yeah, you know, once in 2 years we have Max exhibition. I think you took part in it, right? No. Take part in it, and you'll meet all the people who are important in aviation, and you'll find contacts. The next one will be like in half a year, I think. Yeah, very good piece of advice. Apart from financial investors, there are some strategic investors, and when there are some complex projects, it's strategy which is a more promising and more prospective tool. Because investors, they invest for a short time very often. And the strategy investors, they might focus on strategy on long term, and they would evaluate not only the business itself, but the synergy that they get from collaborating. Maybe they have a more complex evaluation approach. And I think we have a couple minutes left, and last question, and we'll summarize. So we've managed to explain everything. So we do understand how to make startups successful. Okay. Of course, we don't have a single recipe. Of course, it's an art, it's a multi-component art, including talents, ideas, time. Since there are many projects failing because they were ahead of their time. A very outstanding example is Google. Google was far from being the first. They came late, and they added just some small business idea, but they managed to become the most successful player. So there are many cases of this kind. It's very important to understand that you may fail with your projects. And it's important to understand that this failure shouldn't disappoint you and it shouldn't stop you from moving on. And if you have interest, if you want to move on, if you want to go on, and it'll lead you to success. Because I'd say there aren't that many of us, there aren't many entrepreneurs, and there is such a notion, serial entrepreneur, people who start one project after another. And we have a lot of complex things behind that. Unfortunately, in Russia, we are getting the environment and structures created to help the project, and some training is going on too. And I believe that technological startups, new technologies, new technological businesses is something of a great importance for our country. I've been working in an industry for 25 years that's been created afresh. I've graduated from Moscow State University, did my postgraduate studies, found myself out there in the street in the 90s, and I got a simple thought. So the state was supposed to create a workplace for me, and for some reason it didn't do that. Maybe I can create a workplace for myself. And together with my friend, we created a company, and we decided that we'll use our knowledge in programming to create some software. And it was really interesting. It was very hard. Russia of the 90s is a totally separate story, and I believe many of you remember what was it like in many senses. But in general, it was much more interesting for me doing this, and I can say that I lost a lot. Yes, science is quite exciting. I was playing only science, but I managed to replace this with this business, and this replacement is very large scale. I'm getting support, and I think that we will manage to come up with many new technologies altogether. We see a lot of talented young people. We are continuously investing into new projects. We have ideas, and we have people, and we have room for development.
The question is how to develop entrepreneurs. And I want to come to this last point, number 3, as a last minute, because the events like this, you can hear about innovations, you can have all kind of discussion, you can meet entrepreneurs like these gentlemen here. But if you are an entrepreneur and you really want to learn, you have to learn from other entrepreneurs. And we are really boosting that thing. We are doing, Russian startup tour. We have a startup village is next June. Hopefully you all are there. 10,000 to 15,000 entrepreneurs. It's like a rock concert there. Even the Prime Minister is wearing jeans there. So it's not boring, but it's not for show. It's for learning from others. And I just want to make a small commercial. We at Skolkovo and with the Russian government, we are taking on the 18th and 19th of November 350 people, 350 entrepreneurs to biggest European startup event, which is called Slush. It happens to be in Helsinki, which is just an accident, of course. But the point is that if you want to do benchmarking and you see 15,000 entrepreneurs around you, if you just listen to stories, how they are telling, how they are approaching investors, this is the most important part of entrepreneurship, is to learn from other entrepreneurs. And in Russian culture, it seems like that you try to hide your success, but you also problems, so to say. So in entrepreneurship, don't hide anything, just learn, copy everything what you can from these gentlemen. They are successful guys.
Спасибо большое.